Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for making the time. I know how busy you are as teachers. I know personally because I am a mom of a kid at Lochside who is in the wonderful Carolyn McDonnell's kindergarten class, and Carolyn's with us today. Thank you, Carolyn, for coming as well. That means a lot. Fills my heart. It's lovely to greet you here. I'm located in Tsartlip territory in close to Broadmead Village. I live and work from this location and have to remind myself to actually go for walks once in a while, leave the house, get some exercise. It does help on the days that Ella does go to school, which she did not today. I'm sorry, Carolyn. We'll talk about a little bit about why some kids go to school and why they don't, is probably as part of this exercise as well. But you are here today as part of a session called Reconciliation in the Classroom. And it's a pilot project, which is a part of a bigger initiative called the Indigenous Climate Action Program, which is a program of the IISAAK OLAM Foundation. And the IISAAK OLAM Foundation is an organization that my husband and I co-founded in 2017, and I will tell you a little bit about it in a couple of slides. But before we get there, just some goals for today. What are we going to do in our brief time together? I'm going to give you a high-level intro to this pilot project called Reconciliation in the Classroom, give you a chance to virtually meet our team. We have Piper here today. Give a little wave. She's the bright, happy one in the orange shirt. And we're going to have a little facilitated discussion about some of the challenges and opportunities that you face when it comes to applying reconciliation and introducing Indigenous knowledge and pedagogies and ways of being and thinking into the classroom when some or most or maybe all of you are not Indigenous yourselves. I'll introduce myself. My name is Monica Shore, and I am not Indigenous. I grew up in Montreal, Quebec, as a Jewish Montrealer who was put in a fully French language school from kindergarten to grade 11 that was focused on the arts. And it was a school located downtown Montreal where kids were coming from all over the place. And so it was all socioeconomic backgrounds, many different races and religions, and really just sparked curiosity for me about what it means to be human, what it means to be different, how we all live, in this society together, but, experience it differently. And being sort of the only Jew in a public school, an invisible minority, also one of the only Anglophones in a Francophone environment, and kind of getting a sense for some of those like outsider feelings that you can have, even when it's not clear if you are different. All of us are. So I came to Vancouver Island about 10 years ago. I worked in, if anybody knows about UNESCO biosphere reserves, I worked in a sort of a conservation sector looking at how to bring Indigenous perspectives into the conservation world. There have been very few in terms of parks and protected areas. And then I met my partner, Eli Enns, who you'll be meeting a little bit later today, I hope. He's with our youngest right now. And Eli himself is from Tlaoquiat Nation, which is one of the 14 Nuu-chah-nulth nations on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And he is an international expert on the connections between culture and our environment. And he's done a lot of work nationally and internationally, but he's made a big pivotal role. He's played a big pivotal role in moving the conservation sector in Canada forward. And we came together and established IISAAK OLAM 5 years ago and worked together to try to think about the systems in which we all connect and work and thrive or don't thrive as a society, and what changes are needed to really be inclusive and respectful of the different knowledge systems that exist all around us. So a little bit more about IISAAK OLAM. We focus mainly on building capacity and mobilizing knowledge. So we're an Indigenous-led educational nonprofit. We look at how to connect culture and the environment. I said that a little bit already. We exist to support Indigenous self-determination. So we work directly with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit governments to support their endeavors to nation build, is what we call it. And they do that through sort of all areas of their own society and governance, thinking about how their housing is doing, thinking about how they want, what their vision is for their lands and waters from sort of a conservation perspective. We talk to them about culture and language revitalization. And we talk about education systems and how we learn and the best ways for people to learn. And we're looking at sort of all age groups. So most of our programs are focused on adult education and having conversations virtually or in person with, folks like yourselves from different sectors to talk about, well, what does that mean? Like, it's nice to say, okay, let's, we are committed to reconciliation and we want to decolonize our work, but what does that look like in practice? And how are some ways that we can get started or move along our own journeys? So what we know, and sort of looking at that circle, that top circle, connecting culture and environment, is that Indigenous cultures and languages emerged in specific locations. They are place-based. And the languages and the cultures have evolved symbiotically with those places and spaces. And this is an important thing to kind of hold as we sort of move forward in our conversation today and ideally into the next couple of months through future sessions, is when we're thinking about incorporating Indigenous knowledge and teachings, if we can remember that those teachings come from the natural spaces and places where you each are, where you teach or where you live, and if you can connect it to sort of nature simply and the environment and teachings around what a lot of Indigenous peoples will refer to as natural law, that's a great starting point, because Indigenous languages and cultures have evolved from specific places. Many languages actually reflect the sound of or are mirror the sound of pebbles moving on this, moving along the beach on a seashore. They're very, very closely connected to those. So that's like an extremely simplified example, but it's a nugget that is worth holding on to, because as we think, well, I don't know, I really don't know, I'm not Indigenous myself, and I don't have a personal connection to an Indigenous person, and I don't have that, the Indigenous resources are too scattered or, few and far between. There are some like nuggets and sort of core principles that that any person can hold, this, no matter what your background is. So to give you a little sense of some of the people that we work with, it's pretty diverse. We work with universities. We've established some post-secondary programs. We work with the University of Victoria, with their Indigenous law faculty, with their civil society, with their civil engineering department. I was talking about housing and how can even housing, how can there be conversations about decolonization when it comes to housing? How did Indigenous peoples originally live together as families? Or is the way that we establish housing on reserve or off reserve aligned with principles of sort of family unity? Or is that actually separating families and creating the sort of also breaking the linkages in the way people learn from each other, right? If you're an intergenerational learning society where teachings are passed on from your great grandparents and they're not within arm's reach anymore, that's a break in an educational system, right? So it's another nugget here is like, what are the spaces and places that are really important for passing on knowledge? And you have classrooms and you have access to beautiful outdoor spaces. Some schools are luckier to have more access. I know Lochside, where Ella goes, they have a whole forest behind them and a view of Pacals. That may not be the same for everybody, but those are the spaces in which sort of grounding the learning is really important. So being outside as much as possible for your teachings is really critical. You're staring at a bunch of logos, but here are, so Sauk Nation, we work very closely with them on a lot of different aspects. Conservation and housing are two of those topics. We've worked with Saanich Parks and Recreation, looking at how to connect children and families, specifically throughout the pandemic, to local parks and learning about, well, what's happening 5 minutes from my house, and like, what are the histories of this place? We support the Assembly of First Nations as well as an advisor on their environment program. We work with locally, if you've heard of the Pacific Peoples Partnership, they're a nonprofit organization. They're a charity here locally in Victoria that you can also reach out to and kind of check out and see if there's any, if there are any resources or events that you might go to. We support the Métis in their conservation efforts as well, and sort of Métis are scattered all over Canada. And they have a lot of work to do when it comes to land and having access to land to ground their work and teachings. And so we're quite a diverse organization, and we put a lot of focus on seeing and building connections between different sectors. So the origins of the Reconciliation in the Classroom project started back in 2019, and it was really more Eli and myself as parents, having a 2-year-old at that time. Here's Ella kind of at that age, picking some nettle. We were thinking about just kind of keeping her home and concerned about how do we give Ella a good education, but also make sure that she's connected to her own cultures, right? Because she has my Jewish culture and she has Eli's Nuu-chah-nulth culture that she carries with her. And how can she, how can those cultures inform who she becomes and weave through the various things that she learns? So it started as a preschool program, and then 2019, we all know, was right before the COVID pandemic, or right when it started. And when COVID hit and we couldn't continue our work in the parks, in Saanich parks, what we did is to broaden it to become sort of like an online program where we developed some modules and resources. There are some videos on our website currently that you're welcome to use and bring into your classrooms, where we have different knowledge holders sharing sort of like salmon teachings, or we have Chief Gordon Planis from South Nation talking about the interconnection of all things and some of his own teachings, and they're geared for certain young learners, and they're available on our website. And so it was about finding ways to center Indigenous worldviews in the ways that we teach our children, and hoping that those learnings could expand and be shared with others who had similar interests. And rather than just being critical of of whatever system it was that we were struggling to identify with, kind of trying to find solutions and think about, we must not be the only family that's having this conundrum. And furthermore, we understand how ministries of education are resourced, which is not very well, and how even if there is a desire to do this work, that there's probably a gap in the resources that are provided to people such as yourselves. Most of the time, we're working with people who have all of the best intentions and who just don't have the information at hand. And so figuring out, well, how do we mobilize that knowledge? How do we build that capacity so that you can thrive? And so you saw this, if you saw the poster, you'll recognize these objectives, which are the objectives of this pilot project, which is to support educators with tools to ground your commitments to reconciliation in tangible ways in the classroom, ways to diversify your teaching toolkit to better acknowledge and introduce diverse ways of knowing and learning in a respectful way, and how to design educational activities for primary age children that are founded in Indigenous knowledge, values, pedagogies, and principles. And that's a lot. And I'll manage expectations by saying, we won't do that all today. This is broadly, but this is between now and the end of December. These are sort of our roots and what we hope to build upon. And I know that it will only be richer if we have the kinds of contributions that I'm hoping we have from involving you teachers in providing guidance to us before we start thinking about the resources that could be helpful. So sort of not making unnecessary assumptions. People that you may interact with, if you choose to participate in sessions moving forward, myself, Monica Shore, Eli, whom I mentioned, co-founder of the IISAAK OLAM Foundation, our daughter, Christina Enns. Christina is an amazing 17-year-old. She she's really dedicated at school, and she goes to Claremont. She's in her graduating year this year, and she decided during the pandemic to start learning Nuu-chah-nulth, and she is now such a fluent speaker in Nuu-chah-nulth that she is teaching adults how to speak her language, and it's so inspiring. I was hoping she could come today, but she had a soccer game to just open, and she will be at future sessions to provide an opening and welcome. And her role with the project will be to work with the Indigenous educators, with the knowledge keepers, to develop some of the resources and to kind of bring that language lens in, not just focusing on Nuu-chah-nulth, which is her strength, but also Tsimshian and Hulkaminam. And you can kind of guide us in saying, hey, these are some areas where we'd love to have more language resources. We have Piper. Piper's on the call today. Hey, Piper. And, our lives are it's mysterious in the ways that they evolve. And we're so happy to see how relationships progress. Piper came to our family 2 summers ago when my youngest daughter, who's now 2, Thea, was just an enormous pudgy 3-month-old, and Piper came for a summer job as our nanny. And she worked with us for a few months full time and got to know our kids, and was really fascinated in the interview by the work of the IISAAK OLAM Foundation, and was already halfway through her education degree, and was, expressed a lot of support for the work that we do, and we've been having conversations about how we can sort of launch this together. So I'm confident that a lot of those conversations were what led to a success in getting some funding to do the work this year. And Piper, did you want to say anything to folks?
Yeah, like I met them through Happens Chance, and I was lucky enough to be welcomed with open arms into their family, and I've developed wonderful relationships with their kids, with Monica, with Eli, everybody, and even with Tina, with Christina. So I've gotten to know her while she was learning Nuu-chah-nulth, which is interesting. But yeah, as a teacher, and I'm a new graduate, so I even have been able to experience the benefits of the way that the education program is designed nowadays, which does have a focus on Indigenous education and mobilizing that knowledge. However, even then, like, the university does not have the same resources as this incredible organization. And I was like, once I started teaching and practicum, I was like, I noticed that when you're actually in schools, it's a different thing being in university as a learner and having an Indigenous ed teacher that you get to go, you know what I mean? Then getting out there as a teacher and going, I have no idea what to do. Like, I've learned all these things. I don't have the tools. There's very limited resources, really, like when you get to the nitty gritty. And oh my gosh, I can't imagine what other teachers that didn't go through the program when I did, what they must be feeling and experiencing, being like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I was really excited when Monica told me about this whole program going on, because I was like, I just feel like it really helps a lot of people that need it, because it is such an important mandate, and it is such an important aspect of our education nowadays. And so it's learning how to do that effectively is very important. So
awesome. Thanks, Piper. Yeah, well said. I wanted to launch a quick little poll. So to hear from you what grades you teach, because I meant to launch this at the beginning, just to get a sense of who's here. Small group today, but important group. So have a click, let me know, and then I'll share the results. Okay, 5 of 6 have participated. I will end the poll. It's good for me and show you the results. So we have 2 who teach kindergarten, 1 grade 3, 1 grade 4, and 1 grade 5 with us today here. Great. Okay. Fantastic. Just a little lay of the land. Yeah, to build on what Piper was saying, I had a really great conversation with Sherilyn McRae. Thank you, Carolyn, for the intro last week. We talked yesterday and really like a warm welcome. School District 63 has a very wonderful Indigenous educator, education coordinator. And she was telling me about all of the different, things that they're doing and a little bit of the history and how BC is different than other provinces in the tripartite agreement and in the mandate as well to incorporate Indigenous knowledge throughout the curriculum. Well, it's nice to have that as a mandate. But my thought was, oh my goodness, like that's a lot of pressure on everybody to suddenly, have to figure that out. So might be that we're here at a good time, and she is keen to hear how the project evolves and keen to be involved. And so, one of our goals is to make sure that the Indigenous education staff from the various districts whose teachers are involved in the project have an opportunity to talk with us as well. And so you're more than welcome to share our contact information and to get us connected. I think we'll make sure that we don't duplicate efforts in that regard. So not too much more from me, except to give you a sense of the timeline. So we're working with funds from April to the end of this calendar year. In this particular phase, from now until June, when school lets out, before you all disappear to, I don't know what you do, but something different, is to build and learn from you, and to expand on a cohort. So hopefully we can get a couple more teachers involved and interested in participating in these types of conversations, while in parallel engaging Indigenous knowledge holders and knowledge keepers from the school districts and elsewhere that Christina will connect with and bring in and sort of figure out a way to identify what resources they have that may not be available, streamline those, curate those, and then build some resources that are inspired by those materials and those teachings, which in July and August will be the focus of our work. So while teachers go leave the classroom to do other things, we'll be sort of in material development mode. These could be lesson plans, they could be guides like how-tos, they could be info sheets. My suspicion is that while curriculum, and we'll talk about this, I'll test that theory, is that while curriculum and lesson plans may be extremely important, it's possible that there is also a need for and how do you ask for something if you can't find it? And who do you ask? And what's the right way to ask for these materials so that I'm not offending anybody? I know that inaction sometimes is what happens when we don't have the words, and that's a shame if that's really what's holding us back from growing and moving forward. So just to get more clarity on the next couple of months, which we can see in front of us, who knows what's happening in our lives in September and beyond, but right now, today, and then once in May and once in June, we'd like to host sort of focus group conversations, kind of like this will be in the next couple minutes, where we talk about main areas of need and hold space for questions, where we identify the types of tools that might address these needs and provide examples of existing resources that do work well. So a little bit of sharing so that you can kind of become a bit of a peer support community as well for each other. We're all on this journey together, and everybody has some gems that they like to refer to, and why not share those and build a sort of a collective space. So I have another poll. Apparently it's good that I have those reminders in here because I need them, Lord knows. Okay, so my question for you will be, what are the best times to meet? Was 3 o'clock really hard for you to get to? Would a little bit later or a weekend day be preferable? I'm willing if it's good for you. So I'm going to launch this poll. And why it doesn't want to let me, I don't know, but I'm going to try again. Poll 2. Poll has been launched. Did it launch for you? No, it says a poll has been launched in this meeting. Oh, maybe I'm sharing. Okay, let's try this one. All right. Okay, thank you. Okay. I have two, yeah, 1, 2, 3, good, good, good. Leave it for a couple seconds. Perfect, 5 out of 6 have responded, and I will share the results. It looks like 3:30 to 4:30 might be a little bit easier for folks. That 3 to 4 was okay. Thank you. Nobody said Saturday or Sunday.
Monica, if I could just suggest too that, you know, also aligning it with like a professional development day. So we could do it on that day when people are, you know, it could be, I don't know, like sometime on a, like we had a Pro D day yesterday, it would have fit nicely in there for the afternoon, because sometimes it's like, in our district anyhow, you'll have some, you know, your own autonomy to, you do a group thing, and then maybe you have,
Yeah.
you know, some time. So yeah, the, that just, especially for the fall, I would say, right? Because days are so like so busy. But I know we also have a Pro D day on the in September usually, or so. So just something to consider.
Okay, that would be great. And any advice, maybe I'll talk to you afterwards about just how to make that a possibility. How to get on the Pro D Day bandwagon. Thank you, Carolyn. That's awesome. So just the program principles. These are program principles for the Indigenous Climate Action Program that I want to bring into this space too, and sort of center in our learnings together. So one is that learning should feel safe and inclusive to all involved. That being said, being uncomfortable is needed for growth. Danica Littlechild, who is an Indigenous lawyer, she's Cree, is a really big proponent of reconciliation and a big voice for it at the legal level in Canada. And she has talked a lot about how if you're not uncomfortable, you may not be doing the work yet. And so for those of you who are feeling uncomfortable, it's because you're in it. And reconciliation is hard and it's awkward. And it's normal to feel that. So you know, it's sort of like holding those two things in concert, that we want everybody to feel safe in these conversations. But unless we're comfortable asking uncomfortable questions in that safe environment, it can be hard to move forward. Another principle is that Indigenous and Western knowledge systems are equal in value. So it's not just that they're different and that one's nice, but the other one is central to our work, but that they actually both matter, and that the ways in which Indigenous peoples transfer knowledge to each other, share teachings, think about things like time or food, and like the relationship between, you know, eating and learning, that those aren't just like cool things happening over there, but they're central and important, and critical in how we can learn to sort of balance the ways that we teach. So, you know, there's a, like, for me, one of the, as a parent of a young one, like so often, you know, Ella comes home and like, I'm like, oh, you didn't eat your lunch. She's like, I know there was no time. And I'm like, like in 10 years from now, you know, I'm hoping that what we see is that in schools, you know, that lunch isn't like this like thing you go do like quickly over there, but it's actually like a core component of the learning that happens in the day. You know, like what are you eating today? What have you brought? What can we be thankful for from our lunches? And that it be a part of the curriculum, right? But we've in our education system and in our lives in Western society, it's like eat while you're working, like Titan reading, and rather than let's learn from our food. Like we are part of this cycle. It's part of the cycle of life. How wonderful. It's really it's part of, you know, practicing gratitude, which so many cultures do in their own ways. And so how do we bring that in, and how do we center that? And does it need to be like part of the system, or can that be, those can be like minute changes that happen because of a teacher leadership deciding, you know, to do something different about that. So that's one kind of example that comes to mind. In light blue there, decolonization requires us to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Some of the things are, tight in a knot, and and we've been doing them for so long, and that knot, is hard to untie, but much to be gained from trying. Another principle is that everything is interconnected, that Mother Nature is the ultimate classroom. I spoke a little bit about that. And just simply put, respect for each other, respect for the planet, respect for other cultures. And so those sort of we hold as we have our conversations, I hope, and are the principles through which we work in this program. So I'm going to move into our dialogue, sharing just a couple of, these are the things that we could, if so desired, build upon. So things like a guide on how to reach out to knowledge keepers and holders. So understanding protocol, what that means, where you might, slides moving themselves. We might look at developing lesson plans. So like plant identification that is based on what you've got around you, around your schools, and stories about local places. Carolyn, you shared the example of sort of the student teacher wanting to talk about pecals and like, would that be appropriate? And like, how would they do that? And what would be the best way? And if you can't access one of the Indigenous educators, curated resources on various topics. So just bringing resources that exist together so that they're more accessible to you, and advice on how to build upon these resources or create your own. And so I put this book here, you probably recognize it, by, I have to get her name, Melanie Gleason-Lyall. And there's a cool, like, there's some, what they're called, not rap cards, flashcards that are associated with this book. But I read this book to Ellen, it's got great teachings about the animals of the sea. And, those are great, like, starting points for sort of like building a whole, lesson plan off of. And so there are some really great starting points using existing resources, and sort of, there you go. Yeah. Yeah, it's a lovely book. Yeah. So you probably have some of the staples already, within your toolkits, and then kind of how do we expand on those? So to launch, this slideshow is just going bananas here. To launch into our conversation, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop recording as promised.